When I arrived in India, I had been sort of led to India by a series of dreams and visions that happened in Paris and primarily in Ireland and Italy and Tuscany and in Hampshire, where Krishnamurti school is to be found. And when I got there, I was sitting in meditation early one morning, and an inner dictation sort of entered my mind, and I heard, oh no, actually this happened on I think this happened on a motorbike when I'd been about a month in India, and I thought, it's not going to work. Something's off here. I'm going to be immensely challenged. I can't handle it. It's too much. Those were the kind of thoughts that were going through my head. And as I was driving on the motorbike, I heard, Sattvic knight, you are welcome and protected in this land of Sattvic warriors. And Sattva, there are three qualities in the Indian observation of nature. There's the quality of clear, direct clarity, and that's Sattvic or Sattva. And then there's Tamas, which is heaviness or gravity or weight. And then there's Tamas, which is agitation or movement. And the classic teaching around this is that there's a chariot, and the charioteer that's looking for the direction to go forward is Sattva, and Tamas is the weight of the horses and the charioteer and the chariot, and with that weight comes sleep, with that weight comes gross physical bodies, and then there's Tamas, which is the movement or the momentum. And so without like clear perception, the movement and the weight of life, there's like, if you have a blind charioteer, you're going to crash, you're going to have all kinds of problems. And so the focus of yoga, or the focus of wisdom, is to heighten the sattvic qualities, to heighten the perception that's clear, and to make sure that they rule the weight of experience and the weight of the movement of life, and the speed and the direction then can come into a meaningful path or arc. And I studied yoga for a long time, but remember, this was on, having studied the Course in Miracles and in America, and I thought like the Course in Miracles was kind of a novelty at the time, but I'd had some really profound experiences with it, and I was definitely part of the first generation of students. The first generation of students of the first generation of teachers, like my teacher Tara Singh was the first generation to teach the Course. And so I had this sense, because yoga was older, but it was wiser and deeper and more excavated in time because of time. And then, as I observed, there's no like attack on yoga and the Eightfold Path here. There's no sense of like trying to compare, because I once asked a friend of mine what was her favorite teacher, who did she think was the wisest teacher, and she said that's an impossible question to answer, because everyone has a role to play, and each teaching moment, each learning moment is perfect for the people participating in it. And they also, the teachers of wisdom, speak to where the student is. So if you look at the law of attraction community, and you look at Jungian psychotherapy or Carl Rogers' approach to psychotherapy, you have all these different avenues of how to handle the mind, or the martial arts disciplines. And mastery goes on in all of those things. But, you know, law of attraction, law of assumption, that's all about like using your mind to get more stuff and reduce suffering on a certain level and make your life more luxurious, or seek and knock and you will, and it will be answered, seek and you shall find, you know, all of these kind of like The Power of Your Subconscious Mind by Joseph Murphy. And none of that stuff, it's like all useful tools, just as astrology is, just as the Enneagram is, you know. You can say that, you know, you can't blame the tools on a poor workman, you know. So like the tools have a certain usage, but after studying yoga for a long time in India, I became aware of the yogic model of mind. And obviously I've studied a lot of the mythic culture, so I'm very aware of the myths that inform the different psychotherapeutic approaches, you know, like Jesus dying on the cross. That has a profound influence on Western culture. Parsifal has a profound influence on Western culture. The myth of Rama and Sita and the Ramayana, that has a profound influence, as well as the Mahabharata. These things are, you know, you can't separate the myths from the systems of psychotherapy, and they're entwined. But as I witnessed all the bells and whistles that go with yoga, you know, like you need to study with a teacher and you need to teach it and so forth, and that's true of all disciplines, to master it. My interest in what I call the Course in Miracles / Ramana Maharshi started to evolve and grow, and I came to an awareness that my path with yoga was sort of over, like Hatha yoga and stuff. I was grateful for the lessons it imparted, but I'll tell you why it came to an end. My teacher in India, who was world famous, his name was T.K.V. Desikachar. In a sense, I felt like he misled me. He kind of strung me along. And also he raised a son who was just very narcissistic and psychopathic, and yet world famous yoga teacher who was sort of abusing the power he'd been born into. And none of these things are supposed to be statements of judgment on these people, right? They're really just commentaries about my experiences. And remember that it is the nature of the mind, like water in a cup, to take on the properties of the vessel you pour it into. So if you pour the mind and its contents into the ego thought system, you know, that's where we all begin. You take on the facsimile of that approach. But when I was studying the Yoga Sutras and I was seeing all these personalities that were teachers and they were going back to their communities, and it was sort of like a worker bee station in India where everyone was learning to master the Yoga Sutras and yoga asanas and pranayama, which is breath control, and pratyahara, the withdrawal of the senses and things. and then meditation, or the still-pointed mind that leads to meditation, dharana and dhyana, and then samadhi. And I became aware from this eightfold system, you know, well, Buddhism is like Zen Buddhism, is just focusing on the seventh path of yoga, which is jhana, just meditation, just keep it down to the brass they have their brass tacks, just keep it as simple as possible. But as I went along and I looked at my nature, there's a certain laziness about me, and I don't say that in a derogatory way. Tara Singh, my teacher, he said, the busier you are, the lazier you are. And there's a line in the Course in Miracles that says, you're totally weary of this world, right? If you're really into the Course in Miracles, I mean, you're entering a tunnel. On the other side of that tunnel of your application of the wisdom in the Course, your own perception, you're not the same creature that comes out the other side. It's like you go in a lava and you come out a butterfly, right? But this laziness in me was like, I want to drop the busyness. I want to drop the idea. And I've seen people that have been drawn to Ramana and the Course in Miracles that have this similar challenge. They take care of the body and so forth. They treat it with reverence. But this goal to get somewhere, which is very much the yoga path, which is a great path, it's a very good path, is about breath control and so forth. But then you come upon Ramana, right? And the thing about Ramana is, I'm only speaking personally here, but I've come to the awareness that I've given up trying to persuade other people of how I see the world, right? I have no interest in persuading people to look at the world the way I see it. And you might think, well, why are you recording this video? Well, I'll come to that in a second. But when you look at Ramana, you know, he's not doing any practice to get to God or to get to liberation or enlightenment. He's already there. So he's someone that's mastered what you're looking at, as someone that's very interested in the end of suffering. But what I've noticed, the difficult part of it is that you can, when you sort of drop out of all these seeking systems, there can often be sort of like clouds of depression or clouds of sadness or clouds of the sense of futility, which is like, it's like the ego, you know, or the cloud of like, oh, I wish I was married, or the cloud of I'd be much happier if I fixed this. And some of those things are relatively true. Like I had to go and get a visa extension today, and I need to do that. There's things you have to do in the world, right? And I've been quite physically sick. And I came to Ecuador because I had the trauma of some abuse that happened to me at a university in Britain. And then on top of that, I had to handle like holding the mirror up to that, and then like 3 or 4 bouts of COVID over 2 or 3 years, and a divorce, and then difficulties with my father. And these were all just my script, right? The things in my script. And the ego loves when things appear to go wrong in the story of your life. It attaches itself to that narrative, because then it can trap you in its victimhood story, or the victor story, you know, the elation. And I think the reason why I feel Ramana Maharshi is such a good way to see the Course in Miracles is because I think a lot of people think that when you study the Course in Miracles, it says God talks to you throughout the day. You know, I've had a couple of instances in my life where I got a message like, Sattvic Knight, you are welcome and protected in this land of Sattvic warriors. And you might say that was a direct communication, but other times it's an intuition, other times it's a fatigue with something you're doing. It's very subtle, but there is this sense that your will, your free will, is melting away into an agenda that liberates you from anxiety and stress. Now, I had to handle the visa people today, and like they put a fee on my, like I was misinformed about something, so there's a big fee on it, and I tried my best. I put on the mask of saying, well, you misinformed me, why should I pay for that error? And the system wasn't going to buck. I couldn't fix it, I couldn't change it, so I'll have to pay the fee. And a lot of students of like the law of assumption and Neville Goddard and the law of attraction, they would say, oh, I can revise this, I can change this, and so forth. And with Ramana and with the Course in Miracles, you're not trying to fix the outside world. I mean, you can use that sense of golden glow inside you to manifest a wife or a husband, or to bring money into your life, but I think with the Course in Miracles and Ramana, you know, it comes down to saying, and I think this is sort of what I would call like the end of the road spiritual traditions, because they are the ones where you've given up this effort to fix the world, right? And there's a sort of dying going on inside you, and it's a very happy dying. It's not experienced necessarily as a happy dying, but it's like Krishnamurti said, the ego is this entity that wants to become, that doesn't feel it's good enough. And that's dying. And it's on the outside, it's like it's not necessarily very exciting for people to witness, and it's not, but there's this awareness of being, you know. And Ramana, like, he just entered into that state, and so he didn't see the, you know, and one of the things that Ramana says, which is kind of funny, right? And of course the ego can take this and use it as ammunition to attack spiritual paths and things. But he said, you know, when everyone was like, oh, it's your birthday, let's celebrate, and you have a toddler and they're really happy and so forth. He says, why would I celebrate? And he wasn't a curmudgeon, right? He wasn't saying this in a curmudgeonly way. He said, why would I celebrate the birthday of the body? I'm not the body, you know. And people hear that and they think, oh God, what a grumpy guy, or what a boring guy. Where's the jazz and the rock and roll? But that's coming from a state of like deep compassion. Like he's like, yeah, I'm not the body. Thank God, I'm not this corpse. I'm not this entity that's attached to fear. And like, you may be horny and you may be lonely, and these are all things that come with the body, right? And you can't judge them. Like the Course in Miracles and Ramana would say, don't judge them. Be horny. Handle your loneliness however you have. But as you watch it more, maybe you're going to shift. Maybe things are going to change. Maybe your experience of who you are and how you handle it, how you handle who you think you are, is going to come through some radical shifts. And so why am I talking about these things? Because I saw a little short the other day, and it was a man saying that he read something in the Bible about how, you know, your job is to share your gifts. And as I experience that right now, my gifts are like where my interests lie, which is like, I don't necessarily think that this is going to be a video that's going to be seen by millions of people. And that's not important. I mean, I'm not really attached to the fruits. The practice of meditating on what's really important is like, it's like journaling or something, you know. And some people might get value from reading your journals because they can relate, or they're taken on a journey. But what I'm sharing here is like you're only ever teaching yourself, right? Your kindness or your lack of kindness, your lack of attachment to the body or attachment to the body, they're always reflections in the mirror of what you're looking at. And this thing that is suffering dwindles when you bring to application with earnestness, like this inquiry into who I am. And I think for most of us, it's a long, slow journey with a lot of slow deaths. Like the dying of the ego is a slow process, right? Because we're so attached to being someone in the world and someone in relationship. And here the relationship is, it's like a prism, a holographic prism, and it's like I'm looking for myself in others, and that self is healed of the illusion of pain and limitation. And I'm looking for that self within, and the primary process is just within, because everything is taking me there. And you know, the guy that co-wrote the Course in Miracles, Bill Thetford, he said the day he died, it was like this joyous moment. You know, he said, today is my Independence Day. And he practiced the Course in Miracles for a long time. So, you know, mostly we associate death with morbidity. It's like a sad subject. Oh, we've lost him and so forth. But in his exaltation of today as my Independence Day, it was like the forgiveness work that he had to do had reached a point where, you know, he'd excavated the undercarriage of his unconscious mind, and he, you know, he'd walked away from the wasteland of illusion in himself. He detached from it. And so I think, you know, you have all these movies like about spiritual things, and the thing with a movie is you've got to have someone jumping off a bridge or someone falling in love and then falling out of love, and you've got to have all this drama and pyrotechnics and fireworks. And possibly the irony of the spiritual path is that, contrary to all the motivational speakers out there, some of your greatest leaps will come from your most difficult periods of life, because they're the opportunities, as Ramana said, where you are humbled. And in those situations, you're kind of at a dinner table and you're eating food, and you can either be nourished by despair, in inverted commas with the nourished, because no one's nourished by despair. Like, oh, poor me, oh, he's died, I loved him, oh, she died, I loved her, oh, life has no meaning, right? Or you shift and say, right, this realm is an illusion. Only a really sadistic God or creator character or creator idol or creator God would create a world with so much pain and suffering. And so the idol, and that, you know, all of these sort of like clever Christian priests and things, they come along and they say, oh yeah, God gave you suffering to discover your tenacity. You know, God gave you pain to find your inner strength. And I don't believe that for 1 minute. I think the ego created the split mind to mask its plan, and the tenacity and the strength are the dying of the ego thought system. Like, your light is so bright and so beautiful and so powerful. And when you're sitting at that table, you have this choice between eating nourishing food in terms of the thoughts that you're digesting about how you associate what's going on in your life, or despair food, right? Like at the moment, I have to find a way to handle my life situation in Britain, where they've put a big fee on my account, right? And I could invoke Neville Goddard and all of these methods of law of assumption, But I'm just watching it, like Ramana, like I'm so taken by Ramana and the Course in Miracles. I'm like, well, I've tried to fix it, you know, trying to find a lawyer, and I've tried, but I'm far away in Latin America. I had to come here because I needed to be somewhere where I could get better from being sick, physically sick. And it's taken a long time for my physical energy to come back. Like I've really needed a rest, like when you get chronic fatigue syndrome or something like that. And I've leaned into the illness. I've said, okay, don't fight it, just rest, which is a really difficult thing when you're a man in the middle of your life and everything is about like being a doer, you know? So I took this moment and I said, well, I can't, it's not easy to fix this stuff. I don't know what the answer is. I'll give it up to the unknown that I'm letting my life go with. And I'll practice. You know, Ramana said, the most important thing you can do is wake up, you know, and the most important thing you can do with your time is self-inquiry. And from the perspective of the archetype of like the healthy father character that looks down on his son and daughter and says, well, what are you going to do that's useful in the world, son? That's where this line from the Bible came in the other day, because it was like, you know, what's your gift? And your gift, you know, if you're a great plumber, that's a gift. It's a wonderful gift. But then my gift, I feel, is to talk about existential pain, because for some reason I've had a passion to look at that in my life. I've had a profound passion. And I've tried to make it into a more practical, worldly gift. Like when I was in California, I had some profound insights that led me with great hope towards, and I think it was the final coffin of my focus, other than using different diets and things to heal my skin condition. It was the final coffin nail to try and do something to fix the world. So I was really like, I was studying the founders of ancient Greek culture, Parmenides and characters like this, and their spiritual practice is something called incubation. And I started to see into this mystery of like how the quantum physics realm is going to, in very short time, we're going to get closer to the general relativity. We're going to bring these two things together, which is the big holy grail of modern physics. And when we do that, you know, the four forces in the universe, the four physical forces, the strong force between the subatomic particles in the nucleus, gravity, which is one of the weakest forces, electromagnetic forces, and which is very strong, and what's the fourth one? It's gone from my mind for a second. Well, we're going to have a unified theory of all these different like fundamental forces that dominate nature. And I had these experiences because Parmenides was someone who, with Pythagoras and Empedocles was the father of the idea of the atom, they really opened the door to a lot more material advancement in mathematics and physics. And I had some insights around all of this, and I thought, well, no, one of the ways to read, like this earth that we live on, this is heaven. That was sort of my relapse and my final attack thought against Ramana Maharshi and the Course in Miracles and what they represent to me. Because it's true that we'll get to a point where we'll understand how to create artificial gravity so that we can create nuclear fusion reactors, and we will move out of fossil fuels, and we will mature as a species. There's going to be, as usual in human history, lots of bloodshed and lots of wanton, stupid conflict, all born of attack and defense thoughts. That's just what the ego does. That's what this realm is. And I thought, well, no, this is heaven. This place is heaven. And science is the door to reducing a lot of suffering here. And that's true, you know, once you get off an economy based on fossil fuels and you move towards duction, that's what I call it, where you're focusing on forces that don't create problems for the environment, like burning of fuels, like whether it's solar or wind or nuclear fusion, that create a healthy ecosystem, that don't pollute the one as we have it now with the fossil fuels. And of course the scientists will argue over this and the conspiracy theorists will come in, but I just was very interested in the science because I had some insights about the mathematics and the physics, and it came in such a beautiful way, and it was such an innocent thing. But then I went into the world of academia, and I took the path of psychotherapy, and I was going to study this stuff in the on the side, you know, as a passion, and get a job and so forth. And then, like, I just saw how people that aren't applying the Course in Miracles teachings, it can be but myself I injure. I really saw that really closely, and I got attacked, and I had some trauma around that, and then I was physically sick again. And I came to a point where I thought, wow, you know, the only thing that really matters is the self-inquiry. And I met a friend a few years ago who, you know, is a housewife, very content, very advanced student of spiritual matters. And she said to me, you know, just live a normal life. And she said when she went out into the world, you know, people are like, oh, isn't it terrible that this happened? Or, oh, isn't he horrible? Or, you know, and she said it was really hard putting on that mask for people because she just couldn't take sides. And it was meeting someone like that, because once you get into the deeper realms of living the Course in Miracles, Krishnamurti said, you know, there's two fundamental qualities of a religious person. The masculine and the feminine is married inside them. They're as much nurturing as they are purposeful. And the other critical quality, oh, there's three, is that they're completely alone, right? And it took me a long time, only until the last few days, to really understand what that means. What it means is that there's, you know, in those Buddhist monasteries in Japan, they have the sand, that they clean the sand with the rakes, the wooden rakes, right? And what that means is that when you're completely alone, you're not under the influence of another. And you're not even, and that's where the third point, he said, there's no self-concept. So you're not under the influence of the thing that leaves the impression in the sand, which creates karma, right? You've stopped creating that karma. And then you're just kind of led. You're led along a path. And it's very, very frightening for the ego, because you're trusting completely that you're being led. And you're giving up investments in what's the right thing to do. My teacher, when he told me, you know, you will master the Course in Miracles, that's your destiny, like all of us, or the curriculum behind it. He said, go and earn some money. Like, he was really like, the only advice he really gave me was find a practical way to live in the world so you can marry the androgyny inside you, be completely alone. That doesn't mean not be with other people, but be completely independent, like completely free of the fear or the idea that fear has a hold over you. That's what alone means, is that you're like someone comes in and insults you, you go through a traumatic experience, and it's like you, in your mind, are like a monk who's pulling this wooden rake over the sand, and the sand is your mind, and the wooden rake is the external impressions. And then you go over it with the brush, and it's a new day. it's over, right? And you have to handle the problems of the world, but they are not defining you. And when you do those two things, then the self-concept that rules your mind, happy and sad, rich and poor, fear of the future, fear of the past, it has less power over you. Like, I don't know what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. I had this inspiration after like trying to be a psychotherapist, trying to go back into studying some fundamental things in physics, and then trying to be an English teacher, which I'll probably do again. But I had this sense that like what I have as my primary interest in life is where everyone is heading eventually, right? Not to make me special, to put my interest on the top of a totem pole, but everyone is heading to this realization, as Ramana said, and he can say it in the quietest voice possible, but if you have the ears to hear, it's like a thunderbolt, right? When he says it, he says, you know, the most important focus of a mind is self-inquiry. The greatest good you can do to mankind, I'm not talking about like the benefit a plumber brings, or a teacher helping people understand grammar. All of those things are fine, or someone cleaning the dirt in a driveway. We can do good in a million different ways. But at the level of these three qualities of a man of wisdom, you know, not to take sides in the gender war, not to attack a transgender, not to attack a straight person, not to be bound up by attack and defense thoughts. That's step one. Step two is to be this Japanese monk in your mind with the rake and the brush. And whenever the impressions and the trauma come, your job is to watch the impression being made by the rake, and then to brush it over, right? Go back to this formless sand. And then when you do that in the aloneness, the self-concept doesn't rule the mind. And a very placid entity starts to reveal itself. And it doesn't have a center, it's a presence. And why I fell in love with Ramana was because he wasn't doing all these yoga asanas or practicing the Course in Miracles, and you know, because the Course in Miracles is basically, it's like the Course in Miracles, the lessons in it is like an elephant at the City of the Blind, and it's like, well, you know, I'm not a victim of the world I see. I'm not the body, right? So I'm not a victim of the world I see is like the leg, and the trunk is I'm not a body, and then I'm seeing is what I am seeing is a form of vengeance. That's the back, and you know, when you bring these all together, you get the elephant of the awakened nature, right? And it's very similar to Ramana's question, who am I? Like, you're this elephant of the I am, right? You're the elephant in the room. It's like Hafiz has this beautiful poem, you know, ever since happiness heard your name, he's been chasing you through the streets trying to catch you. And that's the amorphous elephant of the I am, like, and so, you know, there is this journey that humans are on, and it's like the toys of the childhood, and then, you know, you see these men in their 60s, and I'm not judging them, and they're just like, they want to be all pumped, and they want to have all these big cars, and, you know, collect car collections and stuff. And I remember having that phase of my life when I was about 16. Like, for me, it was like trying to tick off as many birds as possible, as many different bird species as possible. And then that just fell away. And I remember reading a poem by Walt Whitman where he said, don't be too, in a sense, he said, don't be too anally retentive about the naming of birds or animals or species. But what he said was something far more elegant than that, and eloquent. But he said, don't be too obsessed with the naming of things and the, you know, and that's why the Course in Miracles, it says, I've given, you know, this dresser, this bed, this body, this COVID vaccine, this illness, this problem, this success, this failure, this hope, this hopelessness. I've given it all the meaning myself. I've imbued those things with meaning, and I could see differently. And I remember when I first studied the Course in Miracles, it talks about how you'll see these pinpricks of light, and that's happened a number of times in my life as I practiced the lessons. But I personally feel that the further you go down the path of being deeply, deeply interested in enlightenment, you know, when the enthusiasm wanes and it just becomes behind everything you're looking at in the world is this inquiry, well, where's the joy? Not in a sense of expectation, but in the sense of, I've seen the block to the truth. I've seen the block to the truth. It's not this, as they say in the Indian philosophy, it's not this, it's not that. Neti neti in Sanskrit. And so you patiently sit as the clouds of busyness, or the clouds of emotional pain, or the clouds of frustration, or the clouds of aggression, or the clouds of depression. You know, I don't act on any aggression that comes up on me most of the time. And you usually find that when you're upset, you mostly show that side of yourself with the people closest in your life, right? And then it's like you get punched by yourself out into the outer reaches of space to look at that, because every time you see yourself going, oh, why can't you listen to me, you know, you think, well, I love this person, why am I being so hurtful, right? And so these things become more important than collecting stuff in the world and having, you know, all these toys. Like, I was looking at Jay Leno the other day, and I don't mean to judge this character, he's a, you know, a retired comedian and talk show host, but he's got hundreds of cars, and he's like, all his joy has gone into that. And you meet a character like Ramana, and it's just like, he's totally receded his consciousness from attachment to things in the world, because all he can see is joy, because he's excavated everything that isn't his nature. And that's become his collection. Like, he's become obsessed with dropping all the fearful thoughts and only seeing what matters. And that's where you get, like, you kind of get bored of, like, I mean, all these people that I know that I'm close to that are students of Ramana Maharshi, none of them practice yoga. I mean, and I did for years, right? And then I just, there's a story about this great bhakti yogi. You can get to the top of the mountain through any method of devotion, you know, you can even do it by being a bad person. If you do it with a pure heart, you will eventually find the truth, right? But there's lots of myths about that in the Indian culture. But there's a character who comes, Papaji, and he's so devoted to his, like, mantra practice. He'll do it like all hours, every hours, and it gets him there. But it gets into a place where he goes to visit Ramana, and then he's on the other side of the mountain from Ramana, and he's sitting in a rented place, and Krishna and Radha, like these divine incarnations of mythological symbolism, come into form, right? The gods are real until you go beyond them, and because they're projections of the subtle spiritual ego, you know, because there's still a level of form on some levels. So he's playing with them for a week, and he's in a state of joy, and he goes back to Ramana, and Ramana says, how is your week of, you know, time out from work? And Babaji says, oh yeah, I was, you know, playing with Radha and Krishna. He says it matter-of-factly. And then Ramana, you know, because anyone that loves you will always push you in the right way, in the most gentle way, without trying. It won't come from like a proselytizing or an evangelism. It will just come from the movement of the limitless heart. And he said, oh, well, yeah, are they still here now? Would you see them now? And Papaji says, no, they only appear to me in private. And then Ramana says, my God never leaves me. And his God is the self. And so there was no God outside. There was no one to worship. There was no sense of I and thou. And that was like the, you know, the biggest slap in the face in Papaji's life. You know, he realized that he was stuck on a ledge halfway up the mountain of where he wanted to go. He wanted to go to the summit. So he was someone that, and I've had experiences like that in my life where I thought I've gotten a long way and I meet someone that's way further ahead of me. And they are always a mixture of traumatic and gratitude experiences, right? So you have this trauma like, God, I'm so far off. That's the ego. And gratitude. Oh, thank God. There's someone that has pointed to me the terrain ahead and I have to figure out the map by listening inside. So there's no dependency but there's fear that you won't live up to it. But that's a kind of healthy fear because it guides you in the direction of like